Morning and welcome to this meeting of the Conflicts of Interest Board, which is an open meeting held pursuant to the Public Officers Law. For the purpose of this meeting, I'm designating Catherine Miller to serve as the recording secretary. There are two proposed rule amendments on the agenda. One would deal with the definition of gifts, and the other raising the threshold for an interest in an entity, and this is being done pursuant to the charter, which instructs this board to adjust the number every 4 years. You cannot have an interest in an entity doing business with the city where you own 5% of that entity, or initially it was $25,000, whichever is less. Every 4 years, that figure is adjusted to reflect the consumer price index. So to amend Rule 1-11, on ownership interest, the current number as of 2018 is 50,000. Applying the consumer price index over the past 4 years, we get a number of approximately $55,000. So I would propose that the board adopt a change in the rule to change the number from $50,000 to $55,000, so going forward for the next 4-year period. So if the board agrees, what is the next step? Does this go to a hearing? Where are we in the rulemaking process on this?
Yeah, this is assuming the board approves it as it is currently drafted, it would then go to a public hearing, and then after receiving, the law department for certification. Thanks, Carolyn. And then to a public hearing, assuming that the law department has no changes. If they did, obviously it would come back to the board at that point. But I'm guessing there won't be any. So then it would go to a public hearing and then come back to the board with any comments that were received for the board to consider those and make a final determination.
Right. So is there any objection? Do I have a motion to approve sending this proposed rule forward to the law department and Office of Operations for certification?
So moved.
Who moved? Oh.
I moved. I think
Okay. Wayne moved. A second?
Second.
Second. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Okay. So that moves forward. The other item on the rulemaking agenda is an amendment to the rules dealing with a gift. There are prohibited gifts and certain categories of gifts that are permitted. So this would, I guess, consolidate. It would amend the existing rule and consolidate some of the opinions that the board has rendered over the last few decades, pursuant to an exercise that we are undertaking to turn rule opinions that do have some impact, continuing impact, into rules. This is a mandate that was given to us by the City Council, which I think we're nearing the completion of, having spent the last few years couple of years at least on this process. So these would be an amendment to rules 1-01A, B, and C. Chad, maybe you want to just go through them. They've been to the board twice before. We've asked for changes, and here is another draft. I've got some questions about some of the language, and I guess maybe some of the other members of the board do as well. So maybe, Chad, you want to take us through this just briefly, and then we could look at each provision.
Sure. So at its May board meeting, the board sort of raised two questions about the draft as it's presented. The first was about the inclusion of forbearances in the definition of valuable gift. And this was a change that was intended to encapsulate the idea that in the event that a lender chooses not to collect a gift, or to not collect on a loan, or not that has come due, or not to collect interest on a loan, that constitutes a benefit to a public servant from a firm that does business with the city in exactly the same way as sort of an outright cash gift. That to not collect interest on a loan is the same as really putting money into somebody's pocket. And the board's thought there was that the word forbearance was a little bit opaque and wasn't clear. And so it asked the staff to go back and to try to draft something that is a little bit more obvious and a little bit more user-friendly. And that was the thought behind the changes to Board Rules 1-01A1, where the word forbearance is out, and then sort of more plain language, decision to postpone collection on a debt that's come due is in, including an exception for generally available forbearance or debt restructuring policies that would be available to any member of the public. Would you want me to go through the board's sort of?
No, maybe why don't we do this subdivision by subdivision? Maybe
Sure.
an easier way to do it. I just say initially, I know the board, you're correct. The board thought the word forbearance was sort of opaque, that it did appear in a federal statute, that it wasn't clear precisely how it applied, and I think we wanted more clarity on that. I just looking at the language here, I'm not exactly sure that I quite understand how it would bite. And first, we talk about a lender. So we're talking about somebody who actually someone who has provided a loan to an individual, to an employee. So a lender, and then on the other side, to postpone the collection of a debt. What precisely do we mean by collection of the debt? And then again, just to go through all of them, for forbearance policy available to the general public, that would have no meaning in a situation except where you're dealing with a lender, or commercial or other bank that provides loans and has a policy, I guess, when loans become due, to forbear on collection. I don't know what those policies might be, but if you have a loan in a private capacity, there's not going to be that kind of policy. And in terms of postponing collection, collection has an understood meaning. Collecting on a debt, one could renegotiate. One could postpone. If one renegotiates, I guess that may be a business decision. And it could be a business decision on the part of the lender whether to collect or try to receive a return on that loan, or whether to allow it to continue, or to change the interest rate, or to provide some room for the debtor to repay the loan. This is sort of a fluid situation, and to my mind, it's very, very difficult to determine just when a gift is being given in what might be a commercial situation. I mean, a loan, a loan is included in prohibited gifts, and I understand that, but a loan isn't always a gift. I mean, a loan is most usually is a commercial transaction, or a transaction of some kind of money being provided in return for interest paid, and benefits the public servant, but also benefits the lender, who may be in the business or not, of receiving a return on the investment. So I don't know that I worry a bit about, one, the definitions, where this would apply, and how we would actually apply this, and whether it is really necessary at this point to include this in this rule. We've not had this language.
I just want to ask you a question, because you're suggesting something that occurred to me, and I got to confess that in looking at this, I realized I probably had never thought about the fact that the word loan was there in the original rule. Am I right? This goes back. The inclusion of loan in there goes back to 1990, right? From the get-go. And yeah, you'd say you get a commercially available loan, doesn't feel like a gift. you may feel like you've just been, you've taken it in the teeth because that's the best you can get, but that's the prevailing market rate for a commercial lender to make whatever kind of loan it is. But the other end, so it doesn't really feel that much like a favor, but I don't know that we want to go back to that. Unless anybody thinks they really want to. It does feel kind of funny. I mean, look, take any high-ranking public servant who goes to get a commercially available a mortgage at the going rate. Have they received a loan, a gift from that financial institution, or is there some exception in the rule for commercially available loans, right, at the standard rate? I'm asking that question.
Yeah, no, I don't think, right. I think, Wayne, there's not an answer certainly in the text of the charter to that effect, but I think it's
common sense, right?
Right. I think it's common sense. My guess is that's advice that's been given,
Well, there have been historical examples of high-ranking people who got what were thought to be the sort of favored party's loan rate, and I think that's fair play. But I mean, and the sense of it is really the sense of this exception. I mean, there's plenty of. I'm guessing. I'm looking at some of the younger members of the staff, maybe some of the older as well. You got outstanding student loans, but I think they were all suspended. Collection of them was suspended during the pandemic. Am I right about that? So any heads nodding?
Yeah, yes, that's right. That would be the sort of generally available policy that would.
So what I'm suggesting is that you would think there might be a corresponding analog in the loan provision itself, if it's something that's available to the general public. Who's going to be upset about anybody in city government receiving a mortgage from Chase or Citi or any of the other mortgage lenders? And I don't mean to reopen it now because we were talking really about this exception, this forbearance, and then the exception to that, the inclusion of a forbearance, and the exception to that inclusion would strike me to be under-inclusive because it doesn't have a parallel exception for the loan itself. So I don't know whether we want to go back to. God, we've been working on this one for a long time. I don't want to go back to square one, but it strikes me that we're worrying a little bit about this established policy being permissive for a forbearance, and it seems to me that's kind of silly when the much more common thing is not the forbearance of a loan, is the making of a loan, and we don't have an exception there for the loans that are made in the ordinary course of business. They could care less whether you're a city employee when you go to Chase and want $100,000 mortgage. They just, or a $500,000 mortgage. They just want to know your credit score and your debt history and all the rest. So I don't know. For my thought, for what it's worth on this is just offered.
I mean, staff's thought in attempting to include this was an attempt to capture the risk that a public servant might have an outstanding debt to some firm that would otherwise be a prohibited source of a gift, where the board might. I
understand completely. I'm just trying to. I'm asking them.
Well,
the earlier question.
I think, I think right. I mean, I think right when you're right, and probably the kind of concern that we're thinking about here in terms of someone who's made a loan and is forgiving it or changing the terms to be considerably more favorable, which is a significant financial benefit to the debtor, for lack of a better term.
Listen, I got it. Remember, Holtzman was all about suspension of any kind of inquiry, really suspension of collection during a period of time when an affiliated party was seeking business from the comptroller's office. This goes back 30 years, right? But So the notion makes sense. It's a matter of legitimate concern.
But when you mentioned like an interest in not having to go back to square one.
Oh, no, I'm not,
But the point of the rule
I'm
is
not
to like
suggesting I'm suggesting that could be a concern, but maybe other board members think likewise, that it's silly to have loan in there if we don't have some kind of exception for the, I think, much more common thing, people getting loans and people getting forgivenesses. Forgivenesses, I think, ought to be in there too. But why do you have an out for forgiveness if it's basically general policy? We'll call it a market rate in the case of a loan.
If the point of the rule is to crystallize the board's thought, and the board doesn't have a crystal clear thought about this, it might make sense to put a pin in this particular concept and revisit it at a later date and move forward with the rest of the rulemaking. Or
No, Wayne, if I understand your comment, is that the description of the including a lender's decision, that phrase is narrower than it needs to be, or than is useful, because you think it should include both providing like more favorable terms and not collecting the debt? Is that?
Yeah, I'm suggesting that, and I'm having a hard time articulating this. It's clear, but we've added to this any other item of value for some reason, and I think not nutty, but for some reason we decided to add forbearance of some kind. We're struggling to articulate exactly how to say that, but we've also identified, if we're going to have forbearance in there, we're not meaning when all student loan debt, for example, is the collection is suspended because of COVID, which appears to be a fairly broad policy now. And it's a general policy now, but I'm saying, forget all that stuff. Forget we even thought about forbearance. It occurs to me we've got this term loan there at the get-go in the rule as written now. Why do we have loan in there if we're going to have it in there without some sense that, yeah, it's okay to get a loan at some equivalent to on terms generally available to the public? And I don't know what the precise language is. We would struggle with that language too. But I'm suggesting, why are we spending time
I hear what you're saying, Wayne. I get what you're saying. That this, while we were playing with this term forbearance, it's raised a larger question of whether a loan should be here in the first place, or if it is, how.
That's why you're here, Fernando. Thank you.
My question is, but look, there are loans that aren't going to be a gift, right? So we have to figure out how to define a loan that would constitute a gift. And I think once we define that, then we could define what when a forbearance of a loan would amount to a gift.
Well said.
Right?
Of course, there could be forbearances of loans that are not a gift.
Right. But there could very well be a loan that is a gift.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We know we know when we see it, you know, to paraphrase Potter Stewart. So I think Chad might be right. We might need to put a pin in the concept of loan, because I was looking at the memo, and there are a lot of AOs in there about discounts that are available to the general public and whatnot, but I didn't see any AOs about loan, because obviously this just came up on our radar now. Ethan, do we have some AOs on a loan and what may or may not be a gift, or what factors constitute a gift? What factors determine when a loan is a gift?
We don't have an AO on that subject. We have, there's been at least one enforcement case in the past where, you know, this was at issue, but it was the enforcement case didn't charge that loan as a gift, if I remember correctly. Carolyn will remember the details of the case better than I do, but I think it ended up being just a B3 case because the person was associated with the lender by virtue of being in the financial relationship that is because of the loan. And I think that was the core of that case. But right, I mean, I think, you know, as a general matter, that I think Fernando's right. Like, there are certainly circumstances where a loan is not a loan, never really intended to be a loan, It was really intended to be a gift. We haven't, to my knowledge, really seen that a lot, but probably the more common circumstances, something that was at least plausibly a loan in the first place, and then is never collected, never or the terms of the loan are altered to be altered in a way that's obviously not about sort of a rational attempt to try to collect a debt, but rather intended to be kind of a windfall for the person who owes the debt. Maybe I think maybe I think a couple of the possible approaches here would be to say, look, on the one hand, this is a thing that we need to think more about, and we can move forward with the rest of this without worrying about this issue for now, since it hasn't been an issue that's been pressing on us. The other option is for us to try to tackle this question, which I think probably would be better done with us trying to draft something to address this issue and then bring that back to the board.
I agree that we probably have to move on from this particular language now. I would not want to hold up the entire adoption of the rule. I think if we proceeded with the rule without this addition at this point, but again, as someone suggested, putting a pin in the word loan, because I think more consideration has to be given there. I think what one could come up with a definition of a loan that is a gift. I mean, if it is interest-free, if it is not, if it doesn't carry terms that are commercially reasonable, or interest rates that a reasonable interest rate, a large loan at no or nominal interest may well be a gift, especially under particular circumstances where someone's doing business with the city and somebody could benefit from the action of the officer who is making the decision and receiving the loan. So, and that is certainly distinguishable from going into your bank and getting a mortgage on commercially available terms. But I would want to, maybe the staff consider that, but remove the additional language and proceed for now, since, as you say, it has not been an issue coming up, and it's simply an attempt to incorporate this concept of forbearance, which appears in another statute, but really was not in our AOs or in our rules previously. So I don't know that we have to really address that at this point. So I would propose that we not make that change, but also propose that we give consideration to the word loan in the original section as to when is a loan a gift might be a useful exercise. So we have some consensus.
Jeff, would you then?
Yeah.
Your suggestion is to just drop the phrase "including a lender's decision," just to drop all that.
For now, yeah.
Yeah.
For now, yeah. I would suggest that. It's okay.
That works for me.
Us, no. We could move on to the next subdivision. Or
So the board's
call
next,
that the
sorry,
the discounts, right? Is it?
it's the acceptance of travel-related expenses in connection with interviewing. So the board's next substantive thought was that Board Rules 101A24 sets forth a limited exception for the acceptance of travel-related expenses in connection with interviewing. And at the May meeting, the board requested like an additional restriction on the acceptance of these otherwise prohibited gifts. And in this context, because a public servant must already be recused from any matters involving sort of the target of the job seeking opportunity pursuant to D1, staff's initial thought about what the additional restriction that would make sense would be agency head approval, which parallels the acceptance of travel-related expenses pursuant to 101H.
that does place an additional restriction, I think, but there may be circumstances where the employee does not want their agency head to know they're seeking other employment. So that's an additional restriction. I'm not sure that's the right additional restriction.
It was sort of the thought that came to mind in the interest of having sort of the structures be parallel, but other options could be a dollar limit or like a proportional acceptance, such as, for example, that the cost of the travel related expenses can't exceed what the comptroller would have reimbursed for city travel, which is another option that the board can consider. It can consider sort of those sort of dollar limit exceptions, or it can consider sort of further procedural restrictions, such as like a broader recusal requirement than strictly required by D1 for the acceptance of those charter. So there's multiple ways that the board can attack this. If agency head approval seems like it's effectively too strict, it can sort of attack the issue by placing a cap. Let's say you can't accept travel more than $300, or you can't accept travel above the government rate that the comptroller would accept, or it could attack the issue procedurally by saying that broader recusals must be put in place if a public servant were to accept such otherwise prohibited gifts of travel.
The recusal may not really be applicable because you could be interviewed by someone doing business with the city whose business has nothing to do with your agency or anything you're involved in. So I'm just, this was not in the rule before. We're now adding this, and
this would be a new exception to the valuable gift.
This is right. This is an issue that arises with, not all the time, but some amount of regularity where public servants are asking whether they can accept this kind of travel expenses. Obviously, we've had a lot less of this over the last year and a half, as I think job interviews have largely gone online. Though I got this exact question again on Friday from a high-level public servant who's looking to leave city service and was offered travel expenses. That ended up also going online as over Zoom or whatever. But it's a question we get from time to time. I think some of the kinds of exceptions Chad suggests might work. Let me just kind of sort of set the stage a little bit on what the law would require of this person. As it is, right? Without this gift exception, a person who is seeking or negotiating for a job is subject to what we call the job seeking restriction. It's at Charter Section 2604 D1, and it says essentially that you'd have to recuse yourself. You couldn't seek a job from a firm or person who has a particular matter. In which or who's involved in a particular matter that's pending before you at that time. So we could, right, and you would never be able to accept travel expenses from any firm doing business with the city, or any firm, certainly where it was being offered because of your city position. So we're trying to find a way how can people accept, sort of in the normal course of job interviewing, accept these kinds of travel expenses, while kind of obviously keeping some controls. And the board last time was asking for some stricter sort of set of controls on this. One option would be to broaden that the recusal requirement that you would need to have. So, typically if a person were seeking a job and there was any likelihood that a particular matter involving that prospective employer were going to cross that person's desk, if it's going on in that person's agency or, a subdivision of their agency, and somebody might ask them questions about it or something like that, we would typically advise, that's a place where you would want to get yourself recused in a formal way, right? In writing of some sort, usually just an email to your supervisor or something, in order to make sure that whatever workflow might come your way would instead be directed to someone else. And, people don't care for that for the reason that the chair was suggesting, which is obviously people don't always want to tell their supervisor when they're seeking a job. But if there's a risk that particular matters involving that prospective employer might come before them, we try to insist that a written recusal be put in place. We could sort of try to build on that as a path to explaining when it would be permissible for someone to accept travel expenses, so that essentially, right, like you could limit it. So if they're doing business with or have matters before your agency, then you can't accept it without agency head approval and formal recusal. We could sort of draw the line.
Let me make a suggestion, because
Yeah.
I think that's, before your agency, and there's different size agencies, right? I mean, there's 50 and 100 and 200 employee size agencies, and there's Department of Education. So I think that's tough. I mean, I think my sense on it is that either you've got something in front of you or not, and that's what the D1 job hunting restriction is about. It's not whether it's in your agency. It's not whether you think there's a chance. Is it in some way on your plate now? And if it's not on your plate now, you can talk to them. And if it comes to your plate, you got to stop those conversations immediately and go get yourself recused. And then if you get recused, you can resume the conversations. If you don't get recused, then you're just not going to deal with that employer now, or prospective employer now. So I think unless we think there's just something wrong, we really think it is a gift. And the reason this exception is in here is, I think, because we don't think it's a gift, right? Forget the proviso. We think that if you're looking for a job outside your agency, and this obviously comes up at times like now, and historically, before we invented Zoom, people did take these trips. Not very many. It's not a huge deal, but somebody might fly to California. That sounds like the sort of typical large expense one. But I don't think anybody was. I don't think we've got a history of people taking what looks like a free vacation disguised as job hunting, particularly when given by somebody who's got nothing to do with that person in their city job, right? There doesn't seem to be an evil there that we're guarding against. So I'd almost leave it without that proviso at the end of the agency head approval, because I agree with Jeff. There are a lot of times you're going to deal with somebody there's a lot the other way too, because obviously how do they know you? But there's plenty of people who find jobs other than based upon contacts within government, and it seems to be fine. But then maybe add in here just some kind of reminder about the sense of the D1 rule. It might feel a little bit out of place, and I don't know quite the language, but they can be reimbursed. But remember, you can't even be talking to them. Forget the travel expenses piece of them. If you got any dealings with them in your city position. Otherwise, I think that these solutions, like Jeff suggests on the agency head approval, where it can really be chilling, I think. And the big agency, small agencies thing, if you're thinking about some kind of agency rule, and dollar amount. I don't know how you do dollar amount. $300 doesn't get you to California, right?
Right.
Might get you there, might not get you back.
The dollar amount. Oh, sorry, Fernando, go ahead.
Yeah, just one question, because I guess I'm having trouble seeing. I see the D1 prohibition and this reasonable travel expense reimbursement not being gift as just separate items, in my view. And like right here, we're basically saying that it's not a gift if it's a reasonable travel expense for an interview, period. They have a separate D1 obligation that they know that they have to be recused from dealing with anybody that they have anything pending before. So I thought that when our last conversation, what we were trying to do was add a little bit of teeth to Roman 4 I agree with Jeff's point that it's sort of, it would create some very awkward, it would be very awkward and might not be manageable to ask city employees to get agency head. But is there some language, I'm just throwing this out there, maybe there's some language to make it more tailored, because we have reasonable travel expenses, something that are no more than necessary for the job interview or no more than necessary for the travel and stay. Because I think that's what we're really getting. What we're afraid of is somebody's going to take advantage of this. And instead of, taking a train down to Philadelphia or DC and coming back that day, they decide to throw on another night or two when it's not necessary for the job interview. Or if they're taking a first class seat to California, that's not necessary.
Yeah, Fernando, we had, so there are a couple possibilities there, right? So one is we could borrow some language from 101H, which says that the trip can't be longer than reasonably necessary in order to, perform. In that case, that's for official city travel. But we would say no longer than reasonably necessary for the job interview kind of thing. And then the other thing is, right, we might be able to, instead of having a hard dollar cap, which I agree might be sort of too much for a short trip and not enough for a long.
I'm just to be clear, I'm not in the camp of having a cap.
Yeah, no. So the suggestion would be to get at that. Like, we don't want like some sort of vacation. Would be to say, what if the travel has to be at the same rates that city government permits official travel for government employees, right? Which is, like a reasonably comfortable but not luxurious sort of rate, right? There's a daily rate for, your meals, and then, sort of how much hotels cost, and, you have to get the least expensive coach class flights and that sort of thing. So we could, that would be a way of doing it where we're more flexible, not a hard cap, but it's sort of controlling somewhat the cost of travel for job interviews, so that we would know that it wasn't for vacation. That would be the idea there.
And how would an employee figure that out?
Boy, I'd try something like reasonable and necessary, and maybe add some of that sense. I mean, I just think I think it's overkill here.
Yeah, I agree with you, Wayne, because I'm thinking to myself, how's somebody going to figure out those city applicable rates and stuff? From what I'm hearing is this is not a huge issue. We just need
right. I mean, and to be clear,
I think Wayne's right. I don't want to overkill here. I just want to have some language that says, look, it's got to be reasonable, and it can't be for anything longer than what you need to do the job interview for.
Right. So we can easily add the duration issue. That's easy. We can borrow language from 101H to add to that in place of the agency head approval.
Yeah, the duration, the accommodations and travel arrangements have got to be basically the business standard or whatever, some kind of the 101H kind of terms. The idea is you don't stay longer and you don't stay too fancy, and nobody's saying that you got to stay in Motel 6 or
no offense to Motel 6 fans.
Okay, we'll do that.
We get the word necessary in there, essentially travel.
Yeah, reasonable and necessary is a standard
necessary
term.
Facilitate the interview or something like that.
Yep.
Okay. There are other subdivisions here. I'm not sure whether we're repeating these or not, but I think the unsolicited discounts are irrespective of whether the recipient is a public servant or not. Aren't there discounts that are provided to public servants? Hotel discounts, for example, to government employees. There are, I guess, there could be some store in the vicinity of the civic center that provides a 10% discount for all city employees or something of that sort. There may be discounts, and I think there are discounts that are directed to public employees, particularly, not particular public employees, but to public employees, broadly available to to public employees where they're not available to the general public.
To capture those discounts was the point of that clause in the commas, including city or government employees. But if you think that's insufficiently clear, we can clarify that. The point was to permit those types of discounts where all government employees or all city employees may be permitted to access a discount, but to capture the board's longstanding advice that a discount targeted at a single agency would be impermissible. So if we missed that mark in clarifying that sort of longstanding principle, we could take another crack at that.
Yeah, because if you remove the clause in commas, it would be unsolicited discounts available to any purchaser, irrespective of whether the recipients are public servants. So that would seem to say the public servants could not be treated differently than the public in general. But there are some public discounts targeted to broad categories of public servants. So maybe we have to take that into account, because they do exist. I think.
Right, agreed.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, we cite the AO that says that in the explanation. So it's only an issue of some drafting in the rule, not that we didn't intend for what you're talking about.
I understand that, but the rule, the rule is what people say.
Yes, no, absolutely. We'll get it.
I just make that. And the prizes for the raffles, I'm not sure. What are we getting at there precisely? What kind of raffles? Giveaways?
It's a topic that comes up often, where public servants will attend something and they enter a raffle really on their own time, and then lucky them, they win, but they find themselves in possession of a prize that can be sort of many hundreds of dollars from what would otherwise be a prohibited source. And the intention of this prohibition was to sort of carve out the frameworks where public servants could accept these otherwise prohibited gifts from these people. And the idea is they really have to be attending in their personal capacity. There can be no indication that the raffle, in their entry into the raffle, that they are a public servant, so that the winner of a bona fide raffle would be able to accept their prize.
Right. This too is straight out of an advisory opinion.
Okay. I just wanted to be sure. And I have one other question, which maybe just particular to me. But in the definitions of family members, and this is not different, this is the language that does exist. I don't know if you have it before. A family member means, a spouse, child, grandchild, parent, sibling, and grandparent. And then B, it's a parent, domestic partner, child, or sibling of a spouse or domestic partner. I'm tripping over this language because it seems to imply you're talking about a child, a domestic partner of a domestic partner. Wouldn't it be clearer if the term domestic partner is put in the initial provision? So a family member is a spouse, domestic partner, child, grandchild, etc. And a parent, child, or sibling of a spouse or domestic partner. That the word domestic partner in little two, should be moved up to little one.
Agreed. Agreed.
Doesn't that make it clearer?
Yeah, it's tough to envision that if your spouse has a domestic partner, it's not you got trouble.
Yeah. So I would just, we could make that change. So those are my comments. Any other comments on this? If not, I guess there are a few things that I guess will be brought back to us, I guess, at our next meeting with the changes the board has discussed. So I guess with that, we can bring to a close the public portion of this meeting. Anyone who has attended, I thank you for doing so. And let's proceed to the rest of the agenda.